now we're done.
Now I'm.
Yes, thank you.
I can call the meeting to order.
You can.
Again?
Yes.
Yes, calling the meeting to order, the Affordable Housing Trust meeting on August 15th. The first time on our agenda is to approve the minutes of March 6th. Are there any changes or corrections? If they're not, then we can put them on file. Great. Small repair grant program update. Karen, are you?
You want me
updated?
to do that?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I provided a summary of the last three allocations of funding towards the program. I provide a column on initial commitments, what has been invoiced to date, the balance, and the number of participants. We've committed a total of $172,830. We overcommitted beyond the $150,000 based on the fact that we know we have a rollover of $11,000 from the first year, as well as we expect there'll be unexpended money from the current participants and the approved fiscal year 2024 allocation, if in fact we needed it. We really wanted to grab as many eligible participants as we could in the last round. Of that amount, a little over $89,000 has been invoiced, with about 83 some odd $1,000 in the balance. A good part of that is funding from the last year allocation, and we have a total so far of 47 participants. I expect that there'll be some fall off of participants given numbers of issues, but anyway, that's the status as of right now.
Okay. So I just want to be sure I understand this balance number. Some 40,000 of it is the second round, but there's a lot of other money there that's there. That money is,
I believe it's committed, it just has, they haven't finished the work and invoiced, is that right?
That's
what
right. It hasn't, we've awarded the funding based on their application, but there is a balance that hasn't been invoiced as of yet. It's likely that most of them will invoice it for payment at some point, but there will probably be some fall off as well. We just don't know what the numbers are right now, but that's the status. A little bit more than half has been spent out.
So Karen,
$50,000 it remains in the balance for the last allocation.
Karen, so I'm just worried about a money management issue, so I want to be sure I'm clear on this, right? So if I look at 2020 first round, right, we committed $15,750. We've invoiced 2/3 of that. 1/3 of that, I think you're telling me, has not been invoiced yet to us?
The first, that 2020 fiscal year, one person dropped out and another just didn't need, I think another one did, and the other one just didn't need all the funding that they had expected. So we know we have a balance of $11,000 that can be rolled over to previous years.
Okay.
I mean,
So
subsequent years.
Redefine the term balance. So it means, we need to close out a year, determine what funds can roll forward. Those pieces need to happen.
Okay. I mean, I tend to keep the records based on the participant and when the money's, committed, but the accounting, spends all the money in one fiscal year and moves it over. So they're doing, the due process and
We can provide the second report.
doing that.
Okay.
This is just
All
my
right.
way of kind of keeping track of our participants by year.
Because that says to me, maybe we need to consider what the balance is in there as we're looking what future spending needs to be, understand what, kind of where it's actually ending up and what needs to roll in there. So that would be helpful. Okay. I appreciate that explanation. Okay, anything else on small grant repair program? Our plan is to continue that, and we are anticipating that more citizens will be able to take advantage of it. I hope that it's been helpful to the folks who have been in a hospital or in an urgent situation, particularly that we could now react much more quickly.
This was renewed at springtime meeting, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, 20, okay.
Correct. Yep. So we have maintained contributing to it, so it can be sustained. Item number 3 is the presentation on the MAPC parking study. And I see we have, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Adi. If you could come on and introduce yourself, that would be great.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adi Nochur. I'm a senior transportation planner at MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. If you're not familiar with us, we are the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity to present to you all this afternoon on the Phase 4 update of our Perfect Fit parking study, which we did last year in partnership with the West Metro Home Consortium, looking at multifamily residential parking demand in municipalities west of Boston, including Needham. And we've presented some of these results to the consortium a few months ago. Perhaps some of you were there at that meeting, but really excited to have this opportunity to present to you all in Needham and share a little bit more about what we found, and we can talk about some potential next steps as well. So I have a few slides that I can share. Let me just see if I can bring those up here. Can folks see that okay?
Yeah.
We can, thank you.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and run through these slides, and I'm then happy to be available for any questions folks might have, and then folks can definitely follow up with me over email as well. So just a little bit of background on our Perfect Fit parking work. This, as I mentioned, the West Metro Home Consortium study, which included Needham, was Phase 4 of this work, but we've been at this for a while. Our phases 1 and 2 looked at about 200 multifamily housing sites, largely in inner core municipalities and kind of the urban core of the Boston area. And we found that across all those sites, there's only about 70% of parking spaces were being utilized. So almost 3 in 10 spaces were going sitting vacant at peak demand hours, really, in the middle of the night on a weekend when you would, on a weekday, when you would expect most people to be parked and at home. We did a smaller body of work following up on that right before the pandemic hit in early 2020 on the North Shore, looking at municipalities like Beverly and Salem. And we found similarly that only about 75 to 76% of those spaces were being utilized. And you can find the reports and memos from those previous bodies of work, as well as our most recent Phase 4 update at perfectfitparking.mapc.org. So that's a resource there for all of you to use. Definitely encourage all of you to go and check that out. We have a press release for our Phase 4 study, which included Needham. Our Phase 4 memorandum is up there as well, which goes into this presentation, the findings I'm going to share with you in a lot more depth. There's also an interactive map of all of the sites that we've surveyed across all 4 of these phases of research that you can click on and see where the sites are and what the individual details for those individual sites we surveyed. So just a wealth of information that all of you can use as you think about changes to your local parking policies and how that can help enable more affordable housing production. So just wanted to let you all know that this is sort of the context for the Phase 4 body of work. And really, this work is oriented about finding what are the factors that influence parking demand. When we initially modeled our Phase 1 and Phase 2 results, we found there are 25 variables in total that we examined, which are summarized in the table here. And our model, statistical model that we have developed and refined over the years has found significant impacts on parking demand from parking supply. In fact, parking supply we have found is the biggest predictor of parking demand. Literally, the more spaces that are provided, the more cars parked you're going to find on site, all else being equal. We've also found statistically significant impacts for jobs available by transit. So the more jobs that are available within a 30-minute transit ride of these sites, the lower the parking demand was, and the more affordable units on site that were provided, the lower the parking demand was as well. So these were the most most statistically significant factors we found in terms of being able to predict parking demand. So this is summarizing our phase 1 and phase 2 report. Just a little bit more about the different statistics when calculating parking supply, demand, and utilization. You can see here, this is how we make the different calculations. Parking supply per unit, total number of parking spaces provided on site, divided by the total number of housing units. Parking demand per unit, looking at the number of occupied parking spaces divided by the number of occupied housing units. So you see a slight distinction there. And then for parking utilization, the number of occupied parking spaces divided by the total number of parking spaces. So these are the three statistics that we refer to when I'm looking at parking supply, demand, and utilization, and a little bit more detail on how those statistics are calculated. So this is our summary table from phase 4, which you can find in our phase 4 memorandum, which is available on our Perfect Fit Parking website, as mentioned earlier, perfectfitparking.mapc.org. So for the phase 4 study, looking at the West Metro Home Consortium geography, we had enough data from both the initial property surveys and the overnight parking counts that were conducted to survey 36 sites across 6 municipalities. You can see Needham, in where I'm highlighting my cursor over here. We only had 2 sites in Needham for which we were able to do full in-depth analysis based on the totality of the survey data and overnight count data. And even that we do need to caveat a little bit, because for one of the sites surveyed, the Charles River Landing, we did not end up getting access to the garage. So we weren't able to do an overnight parking count for the garage. So that parking demand figure of 0.62 spaces per unit really only reflects the Kendrick housing site. So we only have partial data there for parking demand just based on one site, but those figures for parking supply of 1.59 spaces per unit, as well as that utilization figure of, I believe, 62%, those reflect both the sites that were surveyed. And I know Stantec also did a parking study for the town. I have been able to review that briefly. They did cite our data point for the Kendrick, and they looked at 3 other sites as well, which I think are pretty consistent with what we found. The parking demand ranged from 0.62 to 1.3 spaces per unit. I don't know what spaces they calculated for parking supply. I didn't see that reflected in their report, but by and large, we are finding that the parking supply is higher than the parking demand for Needham, as well as all of the sites that we've surveyed. So this is a pretty consistent finding across the board, across all 4 phases of our research. And across all of the phase 4 sites surveyed, we only found 61% parking utilization. So that's an even lower figure than we found in the first 3 phases of research. I'm referring back to the first slide I shared that showed that we found 70% utilization for phases 1 and 2, and 76% utilization for phase 3. So it goes to show that in some of these more suburban locations, while you might have more parking demand, which is understandable given that these sites might be more car dependent than they are in the inner core, than they might be in the inner core, you are still finding significant overbuilding of parking to the point that even though there is more parking demand at these sites, the overall utilization is much lower. So definitely some very interesting findings to tease apart there. So again, you can refer to this table in our phase 4 memorandum, and where you have that asterisk for Needham, we have a footnote that explains that in more detail, the fact that we weren't able to access garage counts for one of the sites that we were looking at for the overnight counts.
Hey, Adi, if I could just interrupt for just a second.
Sure.
And I guess I'm thinking of this in terms of feedback, maybe for you or for MAPC going forward. Maybe somebody in Needham knew that you were not able to access that site, but I wish you'd reached out to the town for assistance. I mean, we only had 2 sites, so to not actually get one of the 2 surveyed, to me feels like a real loss and a missed opportunity right now, and I'm disappointed that that happened. So,
Well,
I'm hoping the sites were consistent, which is the premise of your data here, that those sites are consistent, but I would have felt better knowing, given that we only have 2 sites, that we had more than 1 site's worth of data to represent the town.
Yeah. Karen?
yeah, we initially had work done for 3 sites, included Stephen Palmer, Charles River Landing, and the Kendrick. And Kate lined up a couple of people to go out and do the counts in the middle of the night. But they were unable to get permission from Charles River Landing to go into the garage. So Charles River Landing said, no worries, we'll do the counts and we'll submit the information. For some reason, the Stephen Palmer numbers never got to MAPC. I'm not certain what happened with that. And the Charles River Landing piece was a problem, given the cooperation or lack thereof from the development.
Well, I mean, we're happy to share in the funding of studies, but I would hope that we get meaningful results, and I guess I'm concerned about the level of results that we got back. That's all I'm reflecting here.
Great. Was Madura on Greendale considered?
It doesn't sound like they were considered, and I'm also thinking of the one on Highland Ave. I mean, we certainly have other candidates.
Avery.
With outdoor parking, so you wouldn't have the garage access issue.
Well, just be
Yeah.
better.
How are they selected? Do we have?
Yeah, so Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have reached out to all of the major multifamily housing management.
We did,
would be willing
and
to
yes,
participate.
and then there was
So
a
the
decision
three
just,
original were the ones who said yes. Then we followed up to staff those counts overnight. We didn't know we didn't have access to the garage until it was the middle of the night, and we didn't have access, and so by then the study was continuing on. So I hear your concerns. Yeah.
Okay,
And just to
Right.
add, one other note there is, when, for the purposes of coordinating, the study, I was working most directly with, Eamon Bensavengo, who was with, the city of Newton at the time, and he was, I think, working with a lot of the municipal points of contact to figure out the surveys and the overnight counts, and I know town staff in Needham were sort of managing that, so I wasn't, directly in touch with the town staff. It was kind of going through, the city of Newton municipal contact. And so I think the question of the Charles River Landing did come up, and I believe I did follow it up with Eamon at the time. But I think as Karen indicated, we just weren't able to get that data after the fact, unfortunately. Any further questions before I continue?
I just have one about the parking demand overall. I'm surprised that I think I wonder if the overall all sites, I wonder if that figure is actually lower, because it looks like only Concord is above 1.0, and that's only 3 sites. So I'm wondering if that overall number is actually higher than it should be. In other words, I think the supply, like, you know, if that's at 1.58 spaces per unit, the demand I think might be below 1, unless there's something funky going on with like an inflate. If there's one, you know, unit in Concord that's just, or one property that's enormous, exactly, that might be inflating it. Otherwise, I think it actually might be a bigger difference between supply and demand that might be presented here.
So so these are weighted averages for all these summary
Okay, so
statistics
yeah,
across
maybe
all the
Concord just
sites.
okay.
Yeah, so if there are, you know, so some sites might have only 20 spaces on site and some might have 200. So you need to kind of do, you know, all those totals across the board rather than taking, you know, the average for each municipality and then kind of averaging those together. So this is kind of the weighted average looking across all the sites, those summary statistics at the bottom.
Okay, great, thank you.
Clearly,
Because
Needham
you
has
said
the biggest
that's-
disparity.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah, and granted, you know, there are some gaps in the data, but yeah, it still is points in some interesting directions, and you do find, like I mentioned, the Stantec study I think found 0.8 for parking spaces demanded per unit across the 4 sites they surveyed, which included our data point from the Kendrick. I don't know what they were able to calculate for parking supply, but if you know, we were able to look at the Stantec data and see what if we were able to calculate some parking supply statistics, that could help give you a more full picture of what that discrepancy might look like.
Okay, thank you.
So just to continue along here, we ran the same model that we'd used for phases 1 and 2 with the phase 4 data, and we included the phase 3 in the model for the first time as well. And so we looked at a couple of different configurations with just the phase 4 data, as well as modeling the phase 4 data with this broader regional data set as well. And we found the results were consistent with phases 1 and 2. Increased parking supply, once again, was the dominant factor associated with increased parking demand. And we found that increased job accessibility by transit and increased percentage of affordable units on site were both associated with reduced parking demand. So again, the West Metro data really once again confirmed that these are the factors that drive parking demand across the region. And this gets into a little bit more about quantifying the effect of each of those variables on parking demand. Parking supply, each additional space per unit associated with an increase of 0.22 parked cars per household. For job excess, every 100,000 additional jobs accessible by 30 minutes via transit associated with a modest increase of parking demand. And similarly for percentage of affordable units, a 1% increase in a share of affordable units associated with a decrease in parking demand. So again, the conclusion points to that the phase 4 perfect fit parking study with West Metro Home Consortium, it marks yet another contribution to this robust data set that we've been able to build out over the years that really highlights opportunities to right-size parking in line with affordable housing, transit, and climate goals. And so what does that look like in practice? Some of the policy recommendations that we've highlighted in our phase 4 memo are once again consistent with what we've recommended in previous phases of research, including shifting from parking minimums to maximums, reducing parking ratios, unbundling parking from housing costs, and exploring strategies for shared parking. And I know the Stantec report outlines some comparisons in terms of where Needham stands with best practices, and hopefully this provides some guidance in terms of how the town might think about reducing parking ratios and shifting away from minimums to maximums for some of the different land uses, including, of course, housing and affordable housing. And some examples of local policy change, we're seeing more and more cities and towns across the region take this on, looking at places like Somerville that have eliminated mandatory parking requirements across the city and limited how much parking can be built in the most transit accessible neighborhoods. Towns like Arlington that have changed their zoning bylaws to waive all parking requirements in business districts by a special permit. Towns like Brookline, they're voting to reduce minimum residential parking requirements near transit. So we are seeing a lot of movement from cities and towns in the inner core, but with increasing interest from other municipalities as well in making these kinds of local parking policy changes. And so, of course, at MAPC, we're interested in continuing to support municipalities like Needham in your efforts to change these local parking policies. And we're also have been trying to get local and regional attention in the press for these issues as well. So, we issued a press release, which you can see at our phase 4 at our Perfect Fit Parking website. We've already gotten some great attention from outlets like Banker and Tradesman. And we know that these issues are going to continue to be of interest, especially as municipalities move to comply with the zoning mandates under Section 3A, the MBTA multifamily communities requirement. So we know hopefully that this body of work can help cities and towns think about how they can update their parking and zoning policies and requirements to help meet that compliance. And one finding that was particularly noteworthy was when I presented to the consortium back in May, the city of Newton highlighted that how in some instances where they got rid of parking requirements, they were able to double their unit count in some instances if they were able to reduce those parking requirements. So it really points to the opportunity for increased housing production that can be enabled by reducing or getting rid of parking requirements. And if you have any questions, definitely happy to continue the conversation after today. So that's my email, anochur@mapc.org. Karen can certainly provide you with my contact as well. But with all that said, I will stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to field any additional questions or comments you might have at the moment. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present and want to open it up for all of you at this moment.
Questions?
Yeah, can you explain the parking minimums to maximums? I mean, I get the minimum. What's the how do you write a maximum in code? What are you saying? What's that look like?
So that would mean that for a certain land use that you could have no more than a certain amount of parking. So it kind of flips the script around in that sense. So that's what the maximum would be.
Have you seen any communities try that?
It tends to have been a bit more targeted. I think Boston and Cambridge have started moving from minimums to maximums. I can get you more information on that. I think they've been more targeted in terms of focusing on sites that might be affordable housing sites or that might be near transit. So certainly there's been a move some cities and towns have eliminated minimums for some of these more targeted sites. As far as shifting towards maximums, I can look into that and confirm with you all.
And Somerville was named as moving to upper limits for new parking getting developed in their standard here.
I wonder if any of these communities have like a template calculator or something, because it seems, it's one thing to just be like, oh, arbitrarily pick like 40 parking spaces, but I wonder if there's sort of guidance around like, how do you, given the number of units and proximity, if there's a couple of variables to plug in to sort of create like a guideline around that.
Yeah, I would say that, that's definitely a direction that MAPC as an agency is interested in moving in. I think the perfect fit parking research gives you sort of a framework that you can start to use, but it doesn't necessarily say, if you're this particular type of site, what should your maximum be, right? So,
Right.
So I know that, this issue is coming up more and more as we're working with cities and towns in the region on 3A compliance. So, so that's definitely something that we want to look into more as an agency, and we're happy to keep you posted as we dive into that discussion, if that would be helpful.
Well, and I like the ideas about changing parking requirements near public transit, so.
And in the
Since
downtown.
we're still trying to hold to 2 spaces per unit,
Yeah.
which doesn't seem to be anywhere on that chart, but I just know. Yeah. Okay, I am curious with, if we were to go back to Charles River Landing, is there something that says, would you let us in on a night? I presume not during the last 2 weeks of August, but in September, I'm just curious, are there particular considerations that you would give us for advice or if we asked them to give us a count, which is what they said they would do when they closed it? What parameters would we be giving them for getting that data?
Yeah, I would
Email
say
us
if,
that?
yeah, I would say, I think when we had folks going out and doing the counts, it was kind of between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. on a weeknight. I think waiting till after Labor Day, so we're out of kind of the summer travel mix is wise. That's why we were trying to avoid data collection, between kind of post Memorial Day as we got into the summer last year. So I would say, any weekday night, as long as it's not a Friday, and maybe you might want to avoid a Monday as well if people might be slow coming back on a Monday, but any sort of weekday night kind of post summer would fit the parameters.
I'd be interested to see what should have been available from Stephen Palmer as well, because that's like really a different profile and really is in both the downtown and accessible to transit. So
Yeah.
it'd be nice to see if that was radically different than the 2 larger buildings.
Yeah, because
That
I
was
do-
easy. You go look.
Yeah, I do know some people who are there specifically because they don't have a car and.
Yeah.
And it's required, yeah. Okay, all right, great. Any other questions? Then Audie, I want to thank you for your work in pulling this together and presenting to us. So thank you for that information and I know that we're hoping that we can make some changes to
Thank you.
policies.
Thanks, Addie.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you.
You're welcome, and thanks for your time. And again, appreciate the opportunity to present. And if any other questions come up, or if you dig in on some additional data collection at these sites down the road, please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to be of assistance.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
The next item on our agenda is the League of Women Voters study update. Katie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I reached out to Jan Soma when we were prepping for this meeting just to see where they were. I think as you all know, they had wanted to look at comparable communities that have affordable housing trusts, see their makeup, their charge, what they've been doing, what works, what doesn't. So the timeline as of right now for them is to finish their research by this October. Then in January of 24, they will have their draft report, which they bring to the full body of the League of Women Voters. In February, that goes to they present to the full league. And at that meeting, they would finalize the recommendations. So I think we'll have the final in February. So we'll bring them in when they're ready.
Okay, great. Fifth item is the select board goals.
Housing goals. So there is a goal to consider the composition of the Affordable Housing Trust and whether we should be considering a different model than having the select board member and, one member and broadening it and probably having, more, concrete actions and more meetings. But I think that, my sense of the board was to see what the league had to say, since they were doing all the work, that we shouldn't be duplicating that, so. Maybe to keep going the way we're going until March, if they could come in March or April, that would be really helpful. Start implementing some of those goals.
Yeah.
Other housing goals include, DHCD compliance.
And supporting the rebuild
And
of
then,
the housing authority project.
and we created, oh, that's the next item, but we created a committee to oversee community finance housing. We're missing anything on the housing front?
What about Stephen Palmer?
Yes, we've, contacted them to see if we can get a meeting together for, Denver, so.
Do we have to vote?
Yes, that's the next item.
We will when we get there. Katie, I'm thinking, I talked to Jan Soma before they started the study. One of the pieces that I'm just worried, and I'm thinking, maybe I should recall her back or something, or maybe somebody else has talked to her. I do worry, it felt to me a little bit like this mix of funding from CPC sources and other sources to Affordable Housing Trust was getting a little muddied. And I'm hoping that will be clear in their study, because I sort of feel like Needham made a decision to put increased funds in CPC. I think other communities are making different choices about where funds are coming from too.
I think we're hoping they'll study
And
that.
so I'm hoping that all that is kind of.
There are
clear.
many communities where there's an automatic set amount every year that goes to the trust, and that's
Right.
certainly something I think it could very well be a model for Needham and not really affect the enormity of the housing authority, but for us, it would be a huge amount of money. So I think there's.
But I don't want to
Yeah.
end up double counting things. So I'm just a little worried about that, but yeah.
That's a good point.
Just so I'm understanding, Marion, because in Needham thus far, CPA is keeping housing money, but it's not flowing through the trust. And in
It's
some
not flowing
communities,
through the
it may
trust,
be
and-
that they're
and
flowing in.
Sort of
here.
mentally
Yeah.
designated what it's going to be used for,
Yeah.
right? And I think some other communities are actually using CPA funds to the trust.
Yes,
Okay, whereas because we've already sort of considered how those funds would be allocated going forward. Those funds are not available to come to our trust because that's how we're planning to help fund
Carol Beatty,
the project. Right? Oh, is Carol here? Oh,
Maybe
by all
very well.
means, let Carol come over. That would be great.
Yeah, you got it. I was like,
Zoom box.
yeah, again, I was like, I can't find it. Say about it.
lost in the ether.
Oh, no.
Where is she? Hi, Carol.
Hi there. I do hear your concern. I think we're really at the point where we just want to get a sense of where those funds are coming from and how they operate differently. So that, for example, is one thing that would be of interest. Do the funds do the CPA funds does the trust fund get involved with using those or not? So I can see us kind of asking that as a question. Does that help?
So I don't think that the trust fund gets involved in spending the CPA funds.
Right.
I would be,
Yes, many communities, they have an automatic allocation to the trust from
That's-
CPA.
to me, that's different. What Carol said, I heard as the trust fund gets involved in the CPA process, which I don't think happens. Or I
Maybe
don't
we'll-
see happening
yeah.
here.
Yeah, I don't think.
But yes, an allocation to the trust, then it's been taken out of CPA. It's now within the trust purview to be responsible for how the trust is allocating it. Yeah, so you're hoping that that will be an element, that it will be clear what the source of those funds are for the trust as part of your study.
Okay. I should also clarify that while we will come up with some recommendations and have a consensus meeting in the February timeframe, we actually have to vote on that as a whole. So that wouldn't be until May until we set that firm. But certainly enough of you are involved that you will hear what we're developing.
And I'm looking, I can see that Rebecca has her hand up. Is Rebecca working with Janice on this?
Yes, go ahead, Beth.
Yes,
Yeah.
I correctly understand that?
She's actually our study chair, and so she can probably answer some of this as well.
Okay. I think she is joining for a moment.
Good.
Hi there, Rebecca.
Hi, yeah, I was just gonna agree with Carol, but I appreciate you raising the concern. We are like one of the things that we're looking at when we look at the other towns is what is the source of funds? So I think your comment will just make us extra careful about that particular piece. Yeah.
Great, that'd be excellent. I appreciate the care, and we really look forward to what you learn in this study and to how we can use it to make the process and make ourselves better here to be more effective in this area.
Great.
But getting some funding is important if we want to actually do something, so in dribs and drabs, it's not adding up particularly fast, but
Yeah, and I guess I should add, the impetus of this is really coming out of the housing plan, where there was some discussion about how could the Affordable Housing Trust be more active and more involved. And so that is definitely what we want to kind of get a sense of in other places. We're looking at 12 towns initially with the data that's available on their website. So we will start to identify some of those options and the pros and cons and challenges of those.
And what are the 12 towns that you're working with?
So the list is these are towns that were identified a lot because they are very active, although they are somewhat comparable. Brewster, Carlisle, Newburyport, Norfolk, Norwell, Plymouth, Sudbury, Westford, Westport, Yarmouth, Chatham, and Wellfleet. So there is a little bit of a heavy amount focus there on the Cape, but that's a lot because they have such issues. And so they've started to think about ways to be innovative. And these are ones that really came out as ones that have taken a very active role.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I do look forward to understanding what the sources of the funds are, but great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to our goals? I was gonna say, I chuckled, I'm glad you remember, because for me to pull those goals out at this point, yeah. And I would just say too, I mean, here Marcus and I met today with Patrick Lee at Trinity, and Patrick really encouraged us to think about starting earlier on Stephen Palmer. He suggested actually running the process in advance of getting the building. So we'll see if we can, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Can get there.
Just so we know how long it takes to do really anything, so even if we're looking at 27 or whenever it is.
36 months, whatever it might
Yeah,
be.
it's like
And there are
Yeah.
people living in there. and that's
Exactly,
so
try to get
important.
this, make sure that they're settled.
Yeah, and we said
Yeah.
having those people have a place to
Absolutely.
be will be an important part of this too.
Yeah.
So, all right, excellent, thank you. All right, and the last item we have is the appointment to the Town Financed Community Housing Oversight Committee, also known as TCHOC. All right, and we are recommending that Avery Newton be appointed by this body to TCHOC, and I'm grateful, Avery, that you have agreed to serve in this capacity.
Of course.
At least I'm hoping you agreed to serve. in-
Find out in like 2 minutes. Actually, I never said that. Yeah. I never read, but you want me to do it?
No, always happy to serve.
So, and so I think I need a motion and a vote on that particular event.
I nominate Avery Newton to serve on TCHOC.
Second,
Any discussion?
It'll be great.
thank you.
Who's second?
All in favor, or do I need to roll call?
No,
No, all in favor.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Avery, thank you.
Congratulations. Thanks. Yeah, looking forward to seeing how this all shapes up. It looks like an interesting group so far, so.
It does
It'll be
look like
yeah,
a
it'll be
great
good.
group.
Mhm.
Keep having plans, of what else can we get Avery?
This isn't a heavy. Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, is there any other business for this committee.
We'll meet when, next time?
The March?
You wanna meet?
6 months,
So around the time that the,
Yes.
Different voters
We
will
will-
go out.
yeah.
We'll
We might have the draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might have their.
We at least have, yeah, that information, I would assume.
So we could even do, when the report's available, we could, given the composition of this group, we could do a joint meeting.
Yeah. It's really my membership.
Like for a joint meeting, I mean. Yeah. Okay, it seems like it would be an efficient idea, so. We could do that. If there's no other business, then I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. So, because we wouldn't finish, we started at 4:30.